The Q breadcrumbs component is one of those components that's just so simple and beautiful to use. So I'm really excited to show you how it works. So let's jump into main layout and we'll come down here down the list. And I think it's almost time for us to automate this task because it's getting a little bit cumbersome, but it's good practice anyway to get our fingers around how Quasar works. And we'll call this Q-breadcrumbs. Call this breadcrumbs. Come into the routes, copy this down, put a comma in there, breadcrumbs, and it will be Q breadcrumbs page. Copy that, Quasar, new, and then we'll put in the name of the component there. Oh, I've done something wrong. Quasar new page, and then whack in the name of the component. And if we come over here, we now have the Q breadcrumbs page and we're ready to get started. So let's jump into that. Down the bottom here and get rid of the content. We're ready to go. Let's start by just throwing the element in. Q-breadcrumbs. So throw that tag in there and it's going to show nothing to begin with. We have to actually give it some breadcrumbs. So Q-breadcrumbs-el, so a breadcrumb element. And let's just call this home. So that's a breadcrumb for the home page. Doesn't look like much yet. So let's go ahead and create some more elements. Next, we'll create one that says components. And this is going to be very similar to what you'll see in the docs, just because I like to keep things consistent with the docs. Makes it easier to review them later. And breadcrumbs. All right, so at the moment, we're on the page home, components, breadcrumbs. And I think that represents what we're doing really well, because home is kind of like the index page, that first one I showed you. And then the components down here. And then we're on the breadcrumbs component. So it kind of makes sense. Now let's have a little play here to see what we can do. We can add icons. Icon is equal to, I think there's one called home. Yeah, there we go. And for the components, we're going to use something similar to the docs again. And I think it's called components. Nope, that's not correct. There we go. It's called widgets. And there we go. So that falls into place. And let's create one last one for the breadcrumbs. And for this, I'm using scatter plot. That might seem weird, but check this out. It kind of looks like breadcrumbs, so it worked out well for this example. Now, what else? We can actually get rid of all of these labels if we like. So if your icons are really descriptive of what you're doing, you can get rid of the labels. However, in general, I'd probably recommend having them there for a little bit more information on the context. We can also add this to the toolbar. So if I just grab all of that and copy it, and then we jump into our main layout here, let's scroll up. Yeah, so here we've got the toolbar. We can actually go ahead and create another one, Q-toolbar underneath. And that's actually going to look quite good. See how it kind of connects to the one above? This can be really handy because now we can add the property here, inset, and that adds a little bit of padding to the left side of this toolbar. So now if we whack in our breadcrumbs, add a little bit of indentation and save it, yeah, it just sort of spreads out nicely. So now we're going to have to change the color there so that it shows up. Let's set the active color equal to white. There we go. So now active breadcrumbs are going to show as white instead of blue. That's why it was hidden. We can also change the separator. So let's come down here and add a different separator. So let's set that to 2 slashes. And there we go. It shows up there. We can also change the separator color. So separator dash color. And let's make it something really atrocious like red. That looks terrible. All right. What about like gray dash 8? Yeah, it's a little bit better, but not great. Moving on. So we'll get rid of that and we'll get rid of that. We can actually use the separator in a template. So we have total control over it. Template. And it's called separator for the slot. And if you haven't seen this syntax before, that hash is basically the exact same as saying v-slot colon, and then the word separator in this example. Okay, so these two are the same. It's just a little bit of shorthand that Vue gives us. Moving on. So for the separator, let's set a Q-icon, and we'll give it a name that is equal to, how about arrow right? Save it. Okay, so it's not the best looking arrow, but you get the idea. You can put whatever you like in there. So let's get rid of that and just leave it back with the defaults. There we go. In fact, we're going to totally move it out of here and move back to the breadcrumbs inside the component. I just wanted to give you an example of what it might look like inside of the menu bar. There we go, back to normal. Now it's handy to actually be able to link to different places within these breadcrumbs. So let's go ahead and do that. On the breadcrumbs component for home, how about we set that to /? So this is just like using the router link component. In fact, I'm pretty sure that this is just a wrapper around the router component. So now if we say to / and then we click on home, it takes us to that location. And let's add another one in here. And that's going to be for when we're on the breadcrumbs page. Save that, and that's going to take us to the breadcrumbs page, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. And just trying to show you an example here. So it really, we'll probably cross that out. Yeah, because that's telling us that we clicked on a breadcrumb link. All right, so let's leave it at that. We can also disable some of these if we'd like. So maybe we don't want them to go to the home page. We can say disable on there. And now when you put your mouse over it, it doesn't show up anymore with a clicker. Back to normal. And now we get that pointer again. What else? So we can also change the gutter here. So that's basically the space in between the breadcrumbs. Let's change the gutter to medium. There we go. Just adds a little bit more space there. We can also make it large. And we can also change the way that it's aligned. So if we get rid of that and say align is equal to right, we can just throw it over onto the right. Or we could say, for example, center, and that puts it on the center. However, we've got even more flexibility. We can say around, and then it just spreads it out really nicely and evenly. Or if you say between, it's going to push those two outer edge components to the very edge of the page. I'll show you what I mean. See how it pushes them out a little bit further? So you've got around and between. So there's a lot of flexibility there, which I think is awesome. And just to drive this home, I want to give you an idea of what this might look like with something a little more complex. Yeah, because there are some situations where you might want to hide part of the breadcrumbs or show them depending on what's actually visible on the page. I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. Let's come down here and say Q-tabs, and I'm just going to quickly scaffold this out. So we'll create a few tabs down here, and then let's give them all a name. If you don't understand this component, that's totally fine. I just want to give you an example. 2, 3, and then we can put a model up here, and that is equal to the current tab. So if I come down here and say data, let's return an object and set tab to nothing by default. And I think that's about it. The only thing I'm missing now is some actual text to go in there. So let's just say, actually, I'll copy these down. Let's be super crafty here. And then paste it. There we go. So now we've got some tabs in there. Yeah, 1, 2, and 3. And that is modeling some data underneath, which is the tab here. And what's going to happen is as we change these tabs, that piece of data is going to update to the name of the Q tab. This is a really cool component. I actually can't wait to show you guys the Q tab component. But what we can actually do now is change the breadcrumb depending on what tab we have selected. So let's come up here and we'll add a new element. Let's add it at the bottom here. And we'll change this to the name of the current tab. So tab. And there we go. It updates. Let's get rid of the icon. And the other thing we probably want to do is say, if this is equal to nothing, then don't show it. So we want to make sure we've actually got some data inside that tab before we show any other breadcrumbs. And there we go. Check this out. Home components breadcrumbs, breadcrumbs 1, breadcrumbs 2. And then you can show different content on the page depending on the tab that's selected. So I think that's pretty cool. And this might not be the greatest example, but it's nice to know that you can hide and show these depending on what content you have. And if you want to do something more advanced, then I highly recommend looking at ViewRouter's metadata. I've actually written apps that use router metadata in order to update the breadcrumbs and have them reflect where we're at in the application. But that's a little bit beyond the scope of this tutorial, so we're going to move on, and I'll see you in the next video.